A couple of weeks ago, I published a video where I demonstrated how to use Apple Music in order to stream Dolby Atmos music directly into your digital audio workstation so that you could use it as a reference track in a spatial audio production and could monitor it in 7.1.4 surround sound. And that video got a lot of attention. A lot of people had really interesting questions. So I felt it is appropriate to do a question and answer video. So today, your questions with respect to monitoring spatial audio in digital audio workstations and my hopefully useful answers. Let's go. But first of all, hello everybody. In case you're new here, my name is Michael Wagner. I'm a digital media educator with more than 30 years of experience in higher education. And on this channel, I talk about digital media, game design, and spatial audio. Today about a couple of questions that you guys had. If any of those topics interest you, I invite you to subscribe or join our Discord community. That link is in the description below, or there's also a QR code here somewhere. And you can now also follow me on Instagram. Social links are below. Before I get started, I need to make one additional comment. I'm recording this video about a month before it goes live because of the summer break, and I can obviously only respond to comments that I've seen at this point. So if you had a very interesting comment or a very interesting question and I'm not responding to it, it's not because I'm ignoring you, it's because I simply haven't seen it yet. And with that being said, let's get right into our first question, and it's actually a pair of two questions. First of all, Humble Servant 1859 asks, is it possible to get 9.1.6 playback from Apple Music? Good question. And then a similar question from Tripwire 3210. Will this work in 5.1.2 Atmos? So let's simply give it a try. Now I have the same setup here that I had in the last video. I have opened up Apple Music and I'm going to play back a spatial audio track. You're not going to hear that for copyright reasons, but we actually only need to see what channels are active in order to understand how many channels Apple Music is able to send audio into. Then I have Loopback. Loopback is a software that allows you to create virtual devices. Once again, link in the description below. We used it in order to create a 16-channel audio device that is capable of taking in the audio from Apple Music and sending it into the digital audio workstation. In order for that to work, I need to also set the main output to be this Loopback device. And then essentially the only thing I needed to do was in the audio settings, so let's go into the audio device settings. Under Loopback, I needed to also select the speaker configuration. So if I click on Configure Speakers here, I needed to select 7.1.4. And that now means that Apple understands that this is a 7.1.4 speaker setup, and Apple Music is actually going to be sending the Dolby Atmos rendered in 7.1.4 into that device, and therefore also back into whatever additional application you're routing that audio into, for example, a digital audio workstation. If I now play that audio, so let's just play that here, and once again, you're not going to hear that. You see that the audio is coming in at all 12 channels, and that essentially means that Apple is playing back perfectly fine in 7.1.4. So the question was, does this work with other channel configurations, in particular with 9.1.6? So let's simply give it a try. So let's switch that over to 9.1.6. We do have a 16-channel device, so we have enough channels, so that is not an issue. So let's switch that over. Let's click Apply. And let's see what happens. And as we can see, it is not really kind of changing anything. So it's treating a 9.1.6 output device in the very same way it is treating a 7.1.4 device. However, let's try something else. Let's go to the other question was a 5.1.4, for example, or 5.1.2. It doesn't really make any difference. Let's choose that one. And let's click Apply. And as you can see, it has changed actually. You need to look at this channel configuration because of the way I'm switching from one channel configuration to another. This is a little bit messed up, but essentially what you can see, it's now outputting on the first 6 and then essentially on these 4. So it's outputting on 10 channels, which is 5.1.4. So with 5.1.4, it actually works. Let's try 5.1.2. And you can see it's now outputting to 8 channels, 5.1.2, so that works as well. We can also do 7.1.2. So let's apply that. And that essentially means that it's now sending out on 10 channels. So it can do almost any configuration. We can, for example, also do a 7.1. So if you're just having a regular surround setup, you need to use the rear surround settings. Otherwise, it's not going to work. But if we do that, it's going to essentially also going to switch over to 8 channels. And it's sending that out now on 8 channels, so that is working as well. And you can even do quadraphonic or hexagonal setups. You, for some reason, couldn't do octagonal. That doesn't work. But if we do, for example, hexagonal, and we apply that, it's going to send out on 6 channels. Those are the 6 channels. And once again, you need to kind of check what where the channels are and what channel numbers are corresponding to what speaker, because of the way I switch things around, it's actually going to mess up the order a little bit. So in essence, this is working for many channel configurations, but not for all channel configurations. In particular, and this is the one thing I think which is a little unfortunate, it's not working for 9.1.6. That would be really cool, but that's the one thing it's not working. But if you have a surround sound setup that has like a 5.1.2 or 5.1.4 or 7.1.2 or 7.1 or 5.1, the very same technique works just fine. Second question comes from No Qualms the Artist. Very nice handle. How would I do this in Logic? Now, Logic is a little bit unusual, and that is because it does allow you to work with Dolby Atmos, and it does allow you to use surround tracks. However, if you're using an internal track within Logic, you can only go up to 7.1.2. So you couldn't create a track that is a 7.1.4 track, and therefore you couldn't actually route 7.1.4 directly into Logic. What you can still do is you could work with 7.1.2, which in many cases would probably be sufficient. So you're doing essentially the same thing. You're kind of switching the channel configuration to 7.1.4 and then routing it directly into Logic. However, as No Qualms the Artist found out himself, there is a more complicated way that allows you to actually work with 7.1.4 in Logic, and that is by splitting it up into different tracks. So instead of using one 7.1.2 or one 7.1.4 track, what you're doing is you're kind of using stereo pairs for the individual speakers, 5 stereo pairs for the speakers, and then essentially one mono for the LFE and one mono for the center speaker. And you are bringing them in separately and then kind of panning these channels into the speakers directly, so that Logic is actually going to put them or kind of is playing them back on their respective locations. Because while Logic does not allow a 7.1.4 track in the setup in the project itself, it is actually capable of outputting in 7.1.4. So by using this trick of kind of separating out the individual channels, you can trick Logic into doing that. However, this is a fairly complicated setup. Not quite sure if it actually makes sense to go that far. If it's something that's important to you, if you really want to know exactly how the Hate speakers are kind of working, this is certainly something you could do. I probably wouldn't do that because the Hate speakers are most likely not that important to your particular production, and therefore 7.1.2 is probably just fine. Third question comes from QFX Music, a regular on this channel. Thank you for your questions. There's a much easier way now. It's called GroundControl Sphere by Ginger Audio, the perfect solution for monitoring. And I simultaneously have to disagree and also completely agree with your comment. Well, first of all, I do agree that Ginger Audio GroundControl Sphere is an absolutely outstanding software. If you're working with Dolby Atmos, if you're working with spatial audio, and in particular if you're working in a studio environment where you have actually a speaker layout or a speaker setup that allows you to work with multi-channel audio, then this is a godsend. It's really an excellent software. What it really is, it is a monitoring software. So it allows you to take in multiple streams of multi-channel audio and kind of distribute them to different speaker systems, and you can do all kinds of things in between. You can monitor the loudness, you can do speaker calibrations, all these kinds of things. It is a little bit pricey. It costs about $500, which I think is a bit much, but it does a lot of things. So kind of I think it's probably worth it. It only works on a Mac, unfortunately. That is because of the way audio routing works on a Mac. It seems to be easier to kind of do these things on a Mac. However, it doesn't really replace the things that we did in that video. In that video, I essentially did the same thing. The loopback solution is not in any way more complicated or kind of easier. It is essentially the same thing. You're using a virtual device. In my case, I used loopback, and here you would use Ginger Audio's GroundControl Sphere, and then essentially route it to wherever it needs to be routed to, but it is essentially the same thing. So it doesn't kind of, it's not an easier solution, but it is a very nice solution if you want to have a very, very complicated, or if you're working with a complex monitoring system and you want to have a software that is able to kind of manage that in the optimal way. Now, one thing that's really interesting about GroundControl Sphere is that they actually kind of advertise with the fact that you can play back Atmos content from Apple Music. And I thought it's in the marketing material and it's also in the manual. And I found that to be daring. As I said in the video, the fact that we can actually play back 7.1.4 from Apple Music through a virtual device is an undocumented feature, and nobody knows if this is going to stay around or if Apple is going to take that out again. So kind of putting that into your marketing material and kind of creating the expectation that this works is daring, because what would happen if Apple suddenly decides to disable that feature? And does this mean that I can get the money back? So kind of I found it interesting that they actually did that. But in all honesty, I worked with GroundControl Sphere a little bit. I kind of tried it out. It is excellent. It really is. It is expensive. I might actually pick it up and kind of do a couple of videos, because I do believe, especially in the combination with the Dolby Atmos Composer from Fiedler Audio, this is an almost perfect couple. So these two pieces of software almost meant to be used with each other. The Dolby Atmos Composer from Fiedler Audio and GroundControl Sphere from Ginger Audio, they really complement each other, and I might actually do a video about that. If that's something that interests you, let me know in the comment section. The next question comes from JD Israel 7607. And the user asks, does loopback replace having to purchase hardware like Intonato 24? Now, Intonato 24 is a hardware-based monitor management tuning system, and therefore, no, loopback does not replace that. So you still need, what loopback does, it routes audio from one application within your Mac to another application within the Mac, but it doesn't really do anything with the audio in between. You can, of course, kind of route it into a standalone application that can do the tuning for you, and then essentially kind of replace this tuning device with that. However, in general, loopback itself does not replace that. You still need something that kind of does the tuning for you. However, Ginger Audio's GroundControl Sphere is exactly the piece of software that replaces this type of tuning system. So no, loopback does not, but GroundControl Sphere from Ginger Audio does. So if you want to work with a software-based solution, go to Ginger Audio and get GroundControl Sphere. Once again, slightly expensive, but it's certainly cheaper than Intonato 24. Next question comes from Sutuk3422, and the user comments, I use BlackHole by Existential Audio. It costs $10 at the moment. Now, as I said in my video, there are many different solutions for routing audio between applications on the Mac. We used Loopback because it's a software that has been around for quite some time. It is very stable, very highly respected. A lot of people are actually using it. It is a little bit more expensive than most other solutions, but it works well. And it quite frankly has never let me down. So it's probably one of the most used pieces of software on my Mac. However, there are other solutions you could use. You can use the audio bridges that come with the Dolby Atmos renderer, for example, so the Dolby Audio Bridge. You could use the Pro Tools bridge that comes with Pro Tools. You could use the Immerse Audio Bridge that comes with the Immerse Virtual Studio. You could use Dante. You could use, obviously, we use Loopback. There are many different solutions that you can use, and one of those, which is a popular one, is BlackHole. You can use that as well. The only thing that you need to do and you need to have is a virtual device that can take in at least 12 channels and route it to another application. And once again, there are many solutions on the Mac that exists for that purpose, and BlackHole is one of them. It is technically donationware, so you don't need to purchase it if you don't want to. I think it's important to support developers. So if you're picking up BlackHole, kind of donate the $10. I think it's really worth it. Now, I like to use this question to complain a little bit about the fact that there aren't any similar applications on Windows. I'm not quite sure why that is. It puzzles me. These virtual devices that are capable of routing audio from one application to another are extremely useful, and it's really kind of mind-blowing to me that there isn't anything comparable on Windows. Yes, there are a couple of solutions out there, particularly for stereo, so you can use the virtual cables. You can use all kinds of things. You can use check routing, or you can use Dante, but those are not really as usable as all the other solutions that you have on a Mac. And they quite frankly also don't really work all the time. There is an ASIO Link Pro, which is a defunct software that you have to essentially crack in order to be able to use it. And it is, quite frankly, really unusable from the user interface perspective. You could use Reaper with the reroute input and output. That is a nice one, but then you essentially have to start up Reaper and kind of have Reaper run in addition to whatever software you're using. It is kind of weird, I think, that these types of virtual devices exist in absolute abundance on a Mac. But on Windows, you actually have to search for them. And even if you find them, they are not always working. So if anybody knows why that is, let me know. Or if anybody is a skilled developer, this, I think, is an actual opportunity to do something that a lot of people would find useful. And the final question of today comes from user OmneMusic1606, and the user asks, what's the point of doing all this process since you are going to end up listening to a binaural mix anyway? Of course, if you have a speaker system, this is really useful, but I'm not really clear if there's any difference if you're using just headphones. Now, this is a really interesting question because it touches a subject that is highly debated right now. What actually is the purpose of Dolby Atmos if in the end I'm just listening to it on headphones? What is the purpose of actually having a binaural mix? Does it even sound better? Or why would I actually use binaural? Isn't stereo just fine? And that, to me, kind of speaks to a couple of things. First of all, a lot of people really misunderstand what immersive audio is or spatial audio, and they think that a binaural mix is spatial audio. This is not what it is. If you're listening to binaural mix, you're not listening to immersive audio. You're just listening to a render of an immersive audio in a non-immersive way. And the question then is, why would you even do that? And the answer is because that's the only way most people can actually listen to it. In order to be really able to take advantage of the full immersive nature of spatial audio, you need a more complicated setup. You need a speaker setup that allows you to have multiple channels. You need a 7.1.4 or even a 7.1 setup. It doesn't really make any difference. Any surround sound setup that you have, or if you're working with headphones, you need to have some sort of way that allows you to listen to audio in a way that takes head movements into consideration, because the way we really experience sound immersively is not through our ears, because we only have 2 ears. There's limitations on what you can do with 2 ears. The way we really experience sound immersively is by kind of listening in and kind of changing our head positions and kind of making sure that we understand where sound is coming from. And that requires us to move our head around. And if you don't have a solution that allows you to send the audio into your ears depending on your head position, you're not listening to it immersively, and then the entire question of spatial audio suddenly makes no sense anymore, because why would you even do that? This is one of the reasons why I have so many videos on my channel about head tracking, because head tracking, if you're working with headphones, head tracking is really the only way to replicate that. So my personal opinion is that unless you have an immersive listening environment, like a full-blown speaker setup, or a solution that allows you to integrate head tracking in a way that actually makes sense, because there aren't that many really good head tracking solutions out there either, you're not really taking advantage of Dolby Atmos. And the approach that we took was really more of a practical approach in order to get the production of Dolby Atmos going. It doesn't really touch the question whether or not it actually makes sense to produce Dolby Atmos. That is a completely different question. And whether or not it makes sense to produce Dolby Atmos will depend a lot on the technology that's going to come out. If all people are going to be doing in a couple of years is listening to audio through headphones without any head tracking, Dolby Atmos is not going to be of much importance, because a binaural mix is not going to give you that immersive feeling, and people will get kind of bored by that very, very quickly. And worst of all, at least in my personal opinion, I think that binaural audio sounds much, much worse than regular stereo audio. The nice thing about stereo productions is that producers, engineers can really fine-tune the experience that you're getting. They can actually go down to the last frequency band and kind of do all the nice little kind of adjustments that I can't even hear as a non-trained person, and that kind of really optimizes your experience. With binaural rendering, you're a little bit kind of subject to whatever the binaural rendering engine is doing, and that usually is not as good as if somebody actually kind of takes the time and optimizes the audio for your enjoyment. So my personal view is you're absolutely right. The whole thing doesn't make any sense if all you're doing is listening to it binaurally, especially without any head tracking. But we don't know. I mean, there might be solutions coming in the near future that actually make that immersive experience really interesting. I'm looking at the Apple headset, for example. That might be kind of a first attempt to actually kind of make that useful. But unless we actually have a solution like that, it's more of a question if you believe that that technology will become important in the future. It's not necessarily something that I see particularly useful at the moment, especially when it comes to listening with headphones. But I would be interested in your opinions. What do you think about these things? Is this completely pointless? Do you like binaural renderings? Is this something that you enjoy more than stereo? I personally have an issue with binaural rendering. I never really enjoy it. I'm not quite sure why, but that's just the way it is. Let me know in the comment section or join our Discord community. Once again, invert link in the description below. Now, this is really everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. And with that being said, see you at the next video.